Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. Another perfect opening. Another absolutely effortless engineering feat here at the lovely Stratosphere Lounge in beautiful California. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, for yet another thrilling adventure from those thrilling days of yesteryear. So anyway, I hope everybody's doing well. Hey, you know, this has done this several times now, and I don't like it. I don't know what's going on, but I don't like it. It's acting up. It's this hue light is getting uppity. Anyway, here we are. So good to see everybody. Not super aware of anything really earth-shaking to talk about. Texan says my wife doesn't like Stratosphere Lounge. Should I push her down the stairs again? Yes, and if you really want to have some fun, go to YouTube and search for an animated video called "The Terrible Secret of Space," which was done at Something Awful back in the day. I want to say 2004, 5, 6, something like that. It's an animated movie, and I just loves it. I love it. I thought it's great. The Terrible Secret of Space was originally a prank set of messages done by this guy. But anyway, it's all about the pusher robots and the shover robots. That's old school. So I hope everybody is doing well. I am happy to be back here. Happy to be vertical. Beautiful, beautiful time out here. And I don't know that I have any introductory kind of thing. So I suppose I will go right straight to the questions. Other than to say, here it comes, another hour now. I had the firewall, this week's firewall. I was sure I was going to get it finished before the show, but it just got hung up on the pictures at the last second. I got, just a little elaborate towards the very end there. I was talking about my trip out to the destroyer, and I had a bunch of movies that I hadn't used yet, and so that'll explain that. But I'll hopefully get that done as soon as I'm done here. So onward we go. Why don't we just cut to the chase and stop fooling around, shall we? Here's our Facebook page, and let's see what we got. One of these days, I'm going to make a commitment to answering every single question in there, but that'll just create more questions. Looking at comments, I'm going to try more or less, to see in general likeageness. Hey, there's one with 9. We'll start with that. Why don't we? It's from our friend Merlin Wendelbo. Hello, Merlin. Good to see you. Has Darth Vader Ginsburg resurfaced, or has the story of her death been buried? And if she is incapacitated, is there a legal mechanism to replace her? That's an excellent question. I think somebody said that she was spotted in a hallway not too terribly long ago. But she doesn't. The last I've heard is that she's not actually in the court. And the tricky thing about that is, since there's no constitutional requirement for a Supreme Court justice, there's no number of Supreme Court justices specified in the Constitution. Says the Supreme Court must have a Chief Justice, and that's all. So technically, as long as John Roberts shows up, good to go as far as the Constitution is concerned. So it kind of makes for an interesting question. I personally think that if I never ever want to be accused, not even question misquoted, I just don't want to be thought of this way. I don't want to be thought of as a guy who wishes physical harm or death on any of his political opponents. So I hope she makes a full recovery and goes and spends some time with her grandchildren. But if she were to leave the court, then I don't think that the Democrats would I think they would do anything within their power to stop whoever is replacing her until at least after the 2020 election. And I thought, man, that's low. Then I realized, well, right now we have a 5-4 majority on the court, and if it turns out that Ruth Bader Ginsburg goes to visit her grandchildren, then we would have a not a 5-4 majority, we'd have a 5-3 majority. So that's okay. But we saw the progressive escalation of what happened, and I have to tell you, I just simply couldn't believe what happened to Brett Kavanaugh. So we had Neil Gorsuch replacing Scalia, replacing a conservative. They fought nasty for him, but they knew that was a kind of just a replacement. Then you had a moderate being replaced by Brett Kavanaugh, and you saw the most disgraceful display of politics I've seen in this country personally. And if not only a liberal, but if the arch liberal, if the what's the word I'm looking for? I almost said the uber liberal, anyway, the proto liberal, whatever. You know, the person who really is just not just another liberal vote, but is in fact kind of the entire soul of the progressive movement. If she were to go, and then Donald Trump were to replace her with a conservative, the left would lose their minds, and they're going to lose their minds. I really thought, well, what would they do? They would do anything. I mean, really, I no longer have the imagination to figure out what they would do. I know that looks like Amy Coney Barrett is. It did look like Trump was actually when Kavanaugh came up. Looked like Trump had a really strong woman judge, and it looked like he was holding on to her to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and that will take a little of it out, but they're going to lose their mind because I've said this 100 times, and I know I don't want to just keep repeating it, but it's just so important. The court is everything for them. The United States of America, control of the United States of America is based on progressivist premise. You know, she's a Decepticon, all right. The progressives control politics in America by controlling the court. They don't have to get 150 million people to vote for them. They don't have to get a majority of 435 of the people that live in a democracy in this country to vote for them. All they have to do is get 5 people out of 9 to agree with them. And if they do that, then they can simply strike down laws they don't like and legislate laws that they do like, both of which are unconstitutional, but that train sailed quite a long time ago, at least for, at least as far as the communists are concerned. I kept thinking they'll do anything to block her. But then that's when the comfort of it came to me, It's like, okay, so if she goes to visit her grandchildren, instead of an 5-4 majority, we'll have a 5-3 majority. I like it even better. In fact, all the remaining liberal judges could retire, and Congress could fight tooth and nail to avoid Donald Trump appointing any of them, in which case we'd have a 5-0 Supreme Court. Of course, the instant that a Democrat gets into the presidency, then needless to say, those other 4 seats would be appointed overnight. But anyway, it's just another tedious point on the graph of just, they'd rather rule over the ruins than share power in this country. I just can't understand. I can't abide by people watching them destroy the country as they claim they're trying to save it. It's just gone beyond lying or this or that or disagreement. It's just evil as far as I can see. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Looking at the hey. Wow, a 9. Susan Speakman, hi, Bill. Do you think that anything will come of the Inspector General's investigations into the Steele dossier and the Mueller report itself will be allowed to amount to anything significant? I don't really know too much about that. I can't really speak too much about it just because I don't know. But look, the biggest problem of all of the problems is that, Eric Blake got it right, by the way, dealing with the progressives, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. I think that's really it. I really do. Anyway, so I don't really know much about the Steele dossier in terms of details. But they absolutely need to investigate how the Mueller report got going. They need to investigate Christine Blasey Ford, and they need to investigate and come up with a list of indictments against Hillary Clinton because not only is the rule of law essentially vanishing, but because there is no punishment for them, half of the country is convinced that she's innocent. They didn't care that James Comey came out and spent half an hour indicting her, and instead of accusing her of gross negligence, they accused her of it essentially meant the exact same thing as gross negligence, except gross negligence, willful neglect, or something like that. Gross negligence, of course, is a term that's in the actual statute, so you can't actually say that. So the fact that that James Comey what am I trying to say? Good Lord. Just basically rattled off a list of felony charges and then decided, no, but we don't think we should recommend punishment. That means that half the country thinks she's innocent. And if we don't reestablish the rule of law pretty quickly, and it's going to be tougher than I thought, and I thought it was going to be pretty tough, then I really don't know what's going to happen. What we're already seeing, Susan, is we're seeing half of the country utterly willing to break the law. Illegal voters, prison voters, children voters, all of that. And then the other half of the country being basically restrained by our own consciences and virtue, and reaching the point where it's like, okay, it's starting to feel like, like I'm just being a chump on that. So anyway, I have been disappointed. I am more disappointed in the failure of the Attorney General's office than I am in the failure to build the wall, personally. And I have to say, I think, this is legitimate criticisms you can level against Donald Trump, that wall should have been started on day 2. And I have been waiting since the time he got off the podium after being sworn in to see a forklift come in with a cargo pallet full of indictments, and I haven't seen him yet. So I don't know. There's simply no question about her guilt. He just plain read it off. And I read the 2 laws that pertain to this, and they're very clear. If you don't turn in all of your records, that's a felony. There's no question she didn't. There's no question she did that. And if there's any evidence of trying to alter or cover up records, that's a second felony that also carries with it a lifetime ban on serving in the government. And there's no question she did that either. So people are saying, well, there was no classified material. Doesn't matter. Well, she didn't, there was no harm. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The law is written in English. It's an English sentence. Anybody can read it. So go read it. And then you realize that it just doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter. And you know whose fault this is? Our fault. It's our fault. We just let it slide, let it slide, let it slide. And we let them get away with the little things, so then they get away with the big things. It's like broken windows politics, When Bill Braxton and Rudy Giuliani tried to crack the New York crime problem, they described it as a broken windows problem, meaning that in an area where there were broken windows, where people had just thrown rocks through the windows of houses or factories or whatever. The fact that the windows were broken were basically an indication. They were a form of social proof that you can get away with whatever you want to here. This is a lawless area. And so they started enforcing the small things like public urination and graffiti. And as they started enforcing the small things, the metaphorical windows became metaphorically replaced, and people began to behave themselves as if they were living in a great city and not in a, murder pit. Rudy Giuliani and Bill Braxton have saved more black lives than any black leader or than any movement that you can name ever. They just saved hundreds of thousands, probably millions of lives. And you could, well, I don't know if I'd go with that if it was millions, but it's a lot. Tens of thousands. But anyway, if you think about all the people who are murdered in all these other cities, if you had the same kind of policy in St. Louis and Newark and Chicago and Detroit, and Atlanta, you'd see the same kind of effect you saw in New York. Went from being an absolute pit of violence and danger where everybody was terrified all the time to being the jewel of metropolitan life on the planet, practically. I mean, it's nothing like going down Broadway. And to be able to walk down Broadway and not fear for your life is a hell of a nice experience, actually. Now, of course, de Blasio, see, this is what happens. You have 20, 30, 40 years for Democrats to ruin something. And when things get bad enough, that when they're just intolerable, like they were on the subways and Guardian Angels and stuff, when things get that bad, finally people become desperate enough to vote for a Republican. Republican administration fixes things within a year or two. And then people enjoy that, and they can see that the things are improving. So the Republican has 4, 5, 6 years, something like that, at which point he's completely turned the trajectory of the city around. Now the city life is improving, and then they buy a watered-down Republican, and then they buy a moderate, and then they buy a communist. And that's exactly what's happening. New York City's just fallen apart again under de Blasio, and when it gets to be what it was, then they may go looking for somebody who will decide to fix it. We'll see. I'm just glancing here. I'm going to take this one, even though there's not a whole lot of upticks on it. We'll be doing a lot of questions tonight. Charles Tome says, my father worked at Collins, and going through his cabinet, he and I reminisced at lunch today about an amazing aircraft, and there's a picture of the Beech Starship, which is basically Burt Rutan's. Here, I'm going to see if I can do this the quick and dirty way, which means, like, can I do... Where did you go? So much for that. Come on. Well, it's not. All right, well, you know what? You want to be like that? Fine, I'll be like this. Here it comes. You just need to see the Starship. I'm just curious to know if I can just literally grab something and drag it into OMS, because this is actually pretty good software. Apparently not. One more time. Hey, look at that. I mean, that's quick and dirty, but there you go. That's the Starship. It was Burt Rutan's design. And do not touch the space bar. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. So that's a Starship. I'll just move it off to the side so you can see it. And Burt designed a hell of a machine there. I had the enormous privilege of flying the front right seat on that aircraft for 5-6 hours, I would say. No, this is Burt Rutan's baby. And so basically, it's a long easy with turboprop engines, pressurized cabin, and it was designed to be a competitor against the light business jets like the Lears and so on, and the Citations. And since it was a turboprop, most guys out there don't, they don't want to buy propeller airplanes. A lot of people who know nothing about airplanes just look at them and they go, "Oh, that's kind of old-fashioned." So one of the really magnificent airplanes out there is called a King Air, and a King Air is just a kind of a heavy-duty conventional twin. And they're great airplanes, but too many people thought, "Oh, propellers," so they went into jets anyway. So Bert decided, hey, maybe if we design something cool enough, they'll decide to build it. But the thing about the Starship is, at least the beach Starship, if you look at that picture and you compare it to the prototype, the Avanti, Yacker brings out the Avanti. There's an Italian aircraft that is a pusher, and it's got a conventional T-tail, and instead of the big canards, the forward wings that you see coming off of the nose swept back, the Avanti has a tiny little canard. It's like more like a stabilizing. I bet it's a stall, anti-stall canard. It's not providing an awful lot of lift, and that's why they call the Avanti the catfish, because it's got this, like these little whiskers on the front. The catfish is a damn good-looking airplane too. Anyway, so the thing about the Starship is Bert built it light, and he built it very light. And now people who've built Bert Rutan airplanes, I never built one. I flew one somebody else built. They say Bert's attitude to weight is whatever part you're working on, you should step outside, throw it into the air, and if it comes back down to the ground, then it's too heavy. So he has a lot of concern about weight, and I'm going to just do a quick little walk around here on the weight issue. Lisa asks, are there any advantages to a props over a jet? And the general answer is the only one I'm aware of is that they tend to be more fuel efficient, and that can be a big deal. They're slower, but in any way, let's talk about this idea of weight on an airplane. So there are basically two ways you can fly high and go fast. You can add power, or you can reduce weight. We're going to assume that lift and gravity are equal, so you've got enough wing to keep the plane afloat. But if you want to go faster, you can add power, which means put bigger engines on it. Now, the problem with bigger engines is that bigger engines weigh more. That means you need more wing, which means more induced drag, and a bigger airframe, which means more parasite drag. And bigger engines drink more fuel, which means even bigger wings to put the fuel in. And so you get stuck in this horrible cycle. I used to know what this was called. Was it mass fraction in rockets? But basically, the trap you get into if you decide to go the easy way, which is just putting a bigger engine on. And any idiot can throw a bigger engine onto an airplane. The problem with going with a bigger engine is that everything else goes with it, and you don't get a lot of benefits, fuel fraction, in airplanes. I think it's mass fraction in rockets. And so as your airplane gets bigger and heavier in your effort to make it go faster by throwing more and more powerful engines on it, comes a point when all the thing does is fly its own fuel someplace. It doesn't even carry passengers anymore. It's just flying its own fuel and sucking a lot of fuel and just kind of going, brute force through the atmosphere like that. That's a great story. John Pershing, just have to stop, says, possibly apocryphal story. On the Starship flying over Missouri, a pilot got a call. Air Force flight is like next door, pretty cool plane you have there. Can we come alongside for some pictures? So the pilot of the Starship, which you see here, says, sure. And he's looking for probably an F-16 or something like that. And according to the story, looks out the window, and there's a B-2 stealth bomber right there, wing and wing, and the co-pilot's just snapping pictures. Anyway, back to the philosophical idea of Bert and why he's right when he says you throw it in the air and if it comes back down again, it's the part's too heavy. So you can add all of this weight and then follow this nightmare. But if you are able to either reduce the weight or reduce the drag, in other words, make it as slick an aerodynamic shape as possible, and you can see that the Starship's pretty slick, or reduce the weight, then everything is free. In fact, you can actually kind of follow that in the opposite direction. The more weight you can take off of the airplane, the less heavy engines that you need in order to go fast, and then that means less fuel and so on. So cutting weight and cutting drag are all of this is just to say, cutting weight and especially cutting drag are free. It's free. It's free speed. It's free payload. It's free range. It's free. It's just absolutely free. If you try to buy these things through more power, it costs more and more and more and more and more. So when Bert built the prototype Starship, it was all carbon fiber, and it was very light, very nimble, had tremendous performance. Then Beech bought the design, and they were going to use it as a replacement, first of all, one of the problems with the whole thing was they only built 23 of them or something like that, and Beech bought the Starship, and Beech also owned the King Air, which this thing was kind of designed to replace, so it's kind of went into business against itself. But so much of the plane was so radical that they just kept chunking weight onto it. It needed, I don't know if it was, I think the original was made out of carbon fiber. I don't know if all of this was carbon fiber, parts of it, but they just kept putting more and more and more stuff on there. Times Judge points out that I say it's free. I'm starting to sound like a Democrat. Well, the difference in this particular case is it is actually free. You're not. It's not that you're flying for free, because you still have to have an engine and push the thing through the air, and you still have to fight drag. But when you reduce drag, you are gaining efficiency at no cost, at no greater cost. So when I say it's free, I mean it's free improvements. Any delta is free. Just to get that out of the way. So anyway, Beech threw a lot of weight on it, and Bert got quite sad about it. And it turns out that he got really kind of disillusioned with it. And then Beech only built a small number of them. And then after they went out of production, Beech bought them back and destroyed them. I imagine for liability issues. So there's something like 3 or 4 flying, and I got a chance to fly in one of them, the nicest one. Just tremendous, tremendous experience. What a beautiful airplane, so stable, fast, gorgeous. I was in the right seat in the Starship in 2015 at Oshkosh when it was the 40th anniversary of Burt Rutan bringing his first Very Easy to Oshkosh. So it was Burt Rutan. It was a Rutaneganza. And as I told Bert afterwards, or maybe during the air show, because I was there for 5-6 days, I guess, we're walking through Oshkosh with Burt Rutan is like walking through Vatican City with the Pope. It's just unbelievable. Now, can I just delete this? I don't know. No, I don't want to do that. Let's try that again. Yes, I see what I can do. I need to delete the screenshot. Yes. Adios. Okay, somebody's talking about the 737 MAX. If you can hold that thought, I want to talk about that a little bit too. Anyway, so it was Burt Rutan kind of an event. We landed at Show Center in the Starship. We flew the Starship from Coeur d'Alene, and we all got out. That was great. And then the next day was going to be a flyover. The Starship was going to lead it, and then there were going to be a bunch of different Burt Rutan planes. There was a Very Easy, Long Easy, Very Vigan, Catbird, Boomerang, maybe one other. Maybe one other. But if you look at this airplane, the Starship, it was going to be flying lead because it's much bigger than the other ones. And like any other airplane that has kind of not a cockpit, but basically cabin style windows, visibility in a turn is not good. If you look at, all right, just prove a point. Okay, so if you look at this again, you'll see that the window on the right, if the plane was, the air show air boss said that this flyby thing was going to be making right turns, right traffic around the pattern at Oshkosh. And so imagine that you're sitting in the left seat of that airplane where the pilot sits, and you go into a right turn, and you look off to the right to see if there's anything out there that you might fly into. You'll notice that all those right windows, or if you're in a decent-sized bank, all you can see is the ground. There is no visibility out the right side if you're in a right-hand turn in an airplane like that, especially a steep one. So I asked if I could, having spent the whole trip up there in the right seat, I asked if I could ride in the shotgun, and everybody said, yeah, great idea, fantastic, good. So so I was set to go on this thing, and I was a late addition to the roster, so they took it into the air boss and stuff, and the guy says, no, we're not going to let denied. They don't want to put anybody in the air who doesn't need to be there, and that makes sense. They got a lot of airplanes in a small space, and they'd like to keep casualties to a minimum. So they said, Bill, geez, they just said no. I said, well, that's okay. It was worth a try. And then Bert said, what? I said, they said no, Bert. And Bert I don't even think he spoke to me. He just turned around and walked into the little kind of mobile home that they set up to run the show. And I'm just tagging along the same way a little puppy would tag along. And he walked in and he said, can I speak to whatever his name was, who's the air boss? He's running Oshkosh. He's in a meeting right now, Mr. Lieutenant. Could you get him for me? Yes, absolutely. So the person goes over, and 2 seconds later, the guy comes out and says, hey, Bert, what is it? What can I do for you? And Bert says, pointing to yours truly, who was standing there exactly like David Copperfield, with a little dejected kind of look and the big cat eyes, like that. So the guy said, listen, this guy is an essential flight safety officer. The Starship has poor visibility in a turn. We're going to be doing nothing but right-hand turns. We've got a 7-ship formation. We've got incoming traffic from all different directions. I need a safety pilot in the right seat, or I'm not going to fly it. Okay. Well, yes, sir. Yes, sir. We'll take care of it right away. And next thing you know, I am standing at a countertop filling out the information that they will mail to my next of kin. But it was just amazing. And Bert wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling, screaming. He wasn't having a fit. He was just being a freaking Bert. And it just happened. Wow, like that. It was great. I had so much fun. It was such an honor. It's an honor to know him. But being at Oshkosh is like I said, it's like walking through Vatican City with the Pope. And he was doing a presentation in front of a huge room full of people, hundreds and hundreds of people. And then he said, I want to introduce you to somebody who's in blah, blah, blah. And he pulled me up on stage and asked me a couple questions. And I was like, my God, this is absolutely astonishing. So, yeah, that was a great time. And it's a beautiful airplane, but they made it heavier. I'll tell you a little bit about the 737 MAX that I got a report about. I don't know that this is true. I'm not personally acquainted with the source, but the people who sent me the report I am personally acquainted with, and they're pretty serious people who are aviation specialists and designers and pilots. So there were 2 crashes of the 737 MAX within a short period of time. That's their brand new 737. Boeing has taken $1 billion hit because of these two crashes. And here's what I'd heard was the result. Now, I did an afterburner called Into the Sea, where I said it was absolutely inconceivable to me that Air France flight, that gigantic A321 or whatever it was, flew into the ocean because the pilot on the left seat was pushing the stick forward to go down, and the co-pilot in the right seat was pulling the stick back to go up, and the plane averaged the two inputs, so it flew straight ahead, which in this case was down towards the ocean. It's inconceivable to me. I could not think of A330. Sorry, thank you, T-Dog. Air France 447. I cannot, still to this day, I cannot imagine any situation where even if I was looking at somebody, having two people on the stick at the same time could it be of any use whatsoever, since it's fly-by-wire. If you had a mechanical control console, there really were occasionally cases where, a plane would get in a dive and a pilot would pull back as hard as he can, and sometimes he'd need some help, But on a fly-by-wire, the idea that you'd have two sticks and one is saying one thing and one's saying the other, it's inconceivable. Inconceivable. I still can't imagine why they would do that. I think it just automatically should have just said, hey, if you detect an input on the left-hand seat for more than a second, like somebody's moving it, not just bumping it, then it goes to the left seat. The pilot's going to fly the plane. Anyway, that's not what happened. So here's Boeing putting themselves into a situation that I so roundly condemned Airbus for, namely having the airplane think it's smarter than the pilot, having the airplane do things against the pilot's direct commands out of safety. Now, here's what I heard about that. I'd heard that this was a software switch that affected the flight controls, and that I also heard that this software switch was never intended to be employed on U.S. air carriers, and the fact that the switch was even there made American pilots, U.S. pilots, infuriated because it simply was not on American Boeing 737 MAXs. What it was, according to this guy, was Boeing was saying that the safety record of jets that were being flown in the third world was so appalling that they put in this anti-stall lines of program into the software that flies the airplane, and that this system was turned on specifically for sales to countries where the pilots might have had, 400 hours of experience in a 172. So, let's see what we got here. That's what I had heard, and I don't know. I think that seems credible to me. It's what's not credible is keeping it a secret and all the rest of that stuff. Not briefing American pilots on it. If it's in there, they need to know about it. Thinking about it now, in retrospect, I would not be surprised if the reason that we hadn't heard about it before these failures was because if it turns out to be true, I have no doubt Boeing would be accused of racism. Yes, and T-Dog points out that there's a video of the first flight of the A320 where the plane it's its maiden flight. Everybody's watching it. Plane rotates and it's going slow as hell, and the thing just heading towards the trees, and it's skimming the top of the trees and just keeps slowing down. Finally, just disappears into the forest, and there's a big explosion. And the plane was smarter than the pilots. The pilots were telling the plane to climb, but the plane had figured out that it didn't want to climb. And this is the difference between Boeing and Airbus. Boeing decides that the pilot's in control, and the plane will do what the pilot tells him to do. Airbus believes that pilot error causes most of the accidents out there, and so they will not allow the airplane to get into a flight envelope or attitude that would cause that to happen. So in an Airbus airplane, the plane overrides the pilot if the pilot exceeds certain parameters. In the Airbus, you can turn that off, but they didn't on that French flight. And Boeing apparently added this because they had so many sales to airlines with minimally qualified pilots. There's a YouTube channel out there that I like very much. It started out a little weak, but they've just improved enormously. And when I say weak, they're just all kinds of like spelling errors and stuff. It's called the Flight Channel. Not for everybody. But they're using like the newest edition of Flight Simulator, which is very, very, very good in terms of realism. And the Flight Channel recreates accidents and crashes using the flight sim for the visuals and sticking very closely to the actual reports of what happened. I mean, they're very, very, very good. They're very good. And I've seen just about everything they've done. They're really superb. I cannot recommend it highly enough. The Flight Channel. However, if you tend to be a little emotional, you should go into this understanding that virtually everything you're going to see on the Flight Channel is about a catastrophe. And so, in any event, they've done them all. And the Alaska Airlines incident out over Point Mugu is one of the most horrific stories I've ever heard. And they're saying this is kind of similar to what happened with the 737 MAX. But in any event, I think so we're getting a lot of back and forth about this in the comment section. Anyway, I don't know any more than that. But the reason I mentioned the Flight Channel is because they've covered virtually every air disaster that I've ever heard of. And when you see some of the ones that have happened in third world airlines, it's really pretty shocking. The most shocking one by far, I thought, was it was a Mexican airline. Maybe it was Venezuelan. Anyway, they're flying that little nasty four-engine Fokker. That little fucker. I hate that fucking airplane. Anyway, it's a little commuter. You don't see them very much anymore, but they had high-mounted rings with a little anhedral, 4 little engines, T-tail, kind of a regional jet. And the pilots, during the flight planning, were supposed to fly from someplace to another place. Let's just say that it was from, just for the sake of the argument, because I forget the locations. Let's just say it was from Venezuela to Tijuana. So they did the calculations and they realized that direct flight to Tijuana would be right at the extreme edge of the airplane and fuel endurance. And when I say the extreme edge, I mean no reserve. It's not like you're required, even in civil aviation, you're required to be able, if you're flying into anything like instrument conditions, you are required to have enough fuel to fly 45 minutes from the point you get to your destination in case you have to go to an alternative. But these guys were doing the math on this, and they thought, it's 1,740 miles away, and our aircraft is good for 1,800 miles. So they had a plan to divert for fuel, and they got up there, and the airport that they were going to divert for fuel to was having some kind of problems or a lot of traffic, so they just decided to push it, which I've done in an automobile many times. Although not lately. Oh man, do I have enough gas to make this? I think I do. This is something that children do, in teenagers and young males. But I repeat myself. And most of the time, when I've had to push the gas, I have succeeded. And once or twice I've failed. I haven't run out of gas in 30 years. But these guys on board this airplane decided that it was an awful lot of trouble to go and get the fuel, so they decided to fly on. And as they get to the airport, there's rain and so on. There's a bunch of planes in the hold, and they're saying, we've got a fuel situation, which brings up another interesting aviation a little factoid that some people may not know. They said they had a fuel situation, and they said we would like priority clearance. But the one thing that they did not say, and if they had said it, they and their entire list of passengers and crew would all be alive today instead of dead. They did not say we have an emergency. That is a very specific word in aviation language. Here's how the federal aviation regulations work in this country. There are all kinds of rules about where you can fly, how you can fly, contacting this person, contacting that person. There's lots and lots of ways to get into legal trouble, especially in busy airspace like the Los Angeles basin. But once you declare an emergency, you can do anything you want to. I mean, once you've declared an emergency, it's your airplane and it's yours. You land wherever you want to. You can do whatever you want to. If you declare an emergency and you are heading straight for a busy, I could be flying, for example, over LAX. LAX is right on the coast, so if you want to fly from the valley on the north end, I do this so we're all on the same page here. So here's LAX, 2 parallel runways. Here's the San Fernando Valley. Santa Monica Airport's up here. Torrance Airport's down here, and LAX is right in the middle. Now, because LAX owns so much airspace, you would have to divert a very long way to go around LAX. So what they do is they send you over LAX. And tiny little single-engine puddle jumpers are flying over LAX all the time, 3,500 feet going east anywhere from 0 to 180 degrees. It's 3,005, and it's 4,005 from 181 to 360 degrees. So there are these air corridors over LAX, and if you think about it, that's the safest place for you to be if you're going to be another airplane, because all of the big airplanes are on the ground. They're either landing or they're taking off. So you're flying in this, it's called the Special Flight Rules corridor above LAX, and I could be flying my little Sky Arrow, this little 80 horsepower little thing. And if I decide that I've got an emergency and I declare an emergency, I can land on the main runway at LAX. And as long as it is an authentic emergency, and I don't think I can imagine a reason why it wouldn't be, you are essentially covered. And that's fine and sensible and very, very sound rulemaking. Yes, you may have to divert a 747, make a 747 go around and $10,000 worth of fuel or whatever, or more, but, fuel can be replaced and lives can't. So these guys in that flight did not declare an emergency. And as the time got shorter and shorter and shorter, they started to use more and more kind of emphatic tone. But the controller just thought, hey, these guys want to land pretty quickly, but I got 4 other planes that are out there too. So anyway, somewhere, 4, 5, 6,000 feet over whatever the city was, the destination was, number 1 shuts down, then number 3 shuts down, number 2 shuts down, number 4 shuts down. All of the engines on this airplane just shut down in flight because they've run out of fuel. And down they went. Took the entire passenger list and the crew list with them, and probably some people on the ground as well. So you just think that kind of thing just can't happen. And it has happened in America, but the last time I remember it happening in America, I want to say it was Baltimore or someplace. It was another foreign flight. It was might have been Vaca. I don't want to pick on Venezuela, but there was a fuel starvation accident where they landed short of the runway, back east. It might have been, no, I don't know. I want to say Baltimore, BMW, but anyway, running out of fuel in an airplane is not good. That's T-Dog Lies. Yeah, was it New York? I guess it was New York, LaGuardia, someplace. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, maybe it was JFK. Anyway, the same exact thing. They got up there, and they're in sequence to land, and they're running on vapors, and they did not declare an emergency. And the reason they didn't want to declare an emergency in both of these cases is because if they had declared an emergency, there would have been an investigation. And if they'd investigated what had happened, they would have realized that this was the height of recklessness and irresponsibility, and they all would have been fired. Well, guess what? They're not working for the company anymore, and neither are the flight attendants. And neither are the people who were in back of these guys, these yahoos who they trusted with their lives, the Avianca 52. So, get the gas, man. So they didn't want to call attention to it. They just thought, they're sweating bullets. Don't get me wrong, sweating bullets, but they didn't make it. Now, a couple people in the comment section who know more about this than I do are talking about maintaining the type rating for the 737. Type rating is something. It's essentially a license issued by the FAA that certifies a particular aircraft type as being airworthy. These are unbelievably expensive and time-consuming processes, even for a small civilian airplane like a Cirrus, let's say, a little 4-person propeller-driven piston-engined airplane. It costs millions and millions and millions of dollars and 10 years or something to convince the FAA that it's safe. That's why the Longines and all the rest of that stuff are so effective. They're fast, they're quick, they're very efficient because they're experimental, and you don't have to pay millions and millions of dollars to have a guy come up to your airplane and say, that's not safe to fly. You do have to have a guy come up to the airplane and look it over and say it's safe to fly. There is an inspection for the workmanship, but not on the design. So experimental aviation is awesome. Anyway, all of this based on the Starship thing, but I really do like the Flight Channel. It's very good and very poignant in a good way. CP Tomes obviously knows what he's talking about here, and he's talking about runaway stabilizer trim control. That's what I think happened to the Maxes. I think the software, basically, what the software did was the software assumed that the plane was going to stall, and it used the trim system in order to overcome that, and the pilots couldn't fly their way out of it. A trim tab is a really interesting little thing. If you've got an enormous horizontal stabilizer, right, and you tilt it, it's going to so looking at it sideways, if it goes down, it's going to create more lift, and it's going to go up and push the nose down on a conventionally configured airplane. Or if you deflect it up, it's actually taking some positive air pressure here, but negative air pressure there. That's pulling the tail down, which makes the plane climb. Pretty easy, really. That's an elevator. That's how elevators work. But some of these things are absolutely enormous. Some of just like the elevators on the tail of a 737 are much greater than the wingspan of most small airplanes. It's like an airplane in itself. So how do you move that thing? I mean, it's a tremendous amount of force, and the faster you're going, the more force it requires. Most little airplanes don't have hydraulics, so how do you move it? And what you do is you put a tiny little elevator on the back of the elevator. And when this little elevator is moved one way or another way, it makes the back of the elevator go up or down, and that makes the airplane pitch go up and down. And that's how a trim system works. And I bring this up only because if you're well trained, and I was well trained, you are taught to think, and you learn how to think about worst case scenarios. And the worst case scenario for me in an airplane is a mid-air collision. No question. The second worst case is a fire. And the third worst case is a loss of control. So you've got 3 axes on an airplane. You've got the front and back axis, the longitudinal axis. The movement around that is a roll. You've got the nose, which goes side to side in a yaw. That's almost never used in actual aircraft. And then up and down, which is pitch. So let's say I'm not on fire, and let's say I haven't hit anything, but something breaks on the airplane. If I lose my rudder, I can't swing the tail left and right. I can still bank and turn. I can still control the pitch. So losing the rudder is not a big deal. Most guys make pretty crummy landings anyway. You just be careful on your turns, and losing the rudder is essentially a non-event. So, non-event. If you lose the the ailerons that control the roll, now you can't bank the airplane, and airplanes tend to climb into the bank. Losing the ailerons is a lot more important and a lot more dangerous. But most civilian airplanes have something called dihedral, which means the wings are mounted at an angle. I'm extremely exaggerating this, but the reason you have dihedral is it's stable, so if the plane gets into a bank, it always just basically wants to come back and find its level flight. So if I lost control of the ailerons, if I couldn't bank the airplane, the plane would stay level, and I could steer it with the rudder. I could put the rudder in and just slowly yaw the nose over. It's not the way planes like to turn, but it's certainly doable. Just make a big old wide flat circle, and then you just do a nice long straight in landing. So that's not a big deal either. But if you lose the elevator, you're in real trouble. The elevator is what controls the nose of the aircraft, its engine, the angle of the airplane. And if you can't control the angle of the nose, you're in a lot of trouble. So let's just say that I'm flying along in my Sky Arrow, and it's got a trim tab on the horizontal stabilizers on the top, it's T-tail, so there's a little movable tab that flies the elevator. And I'm coming in, or I'm taking off, and I'm about to go someplace, and I pull back on the side stick, and I hear this tink, and now I'm doing this with the stick, and the nose of the plane is not changing at all. I've lost pitch control on my airplane. Now I'm in real trouble. But the reason I bring all of this up is you should always fly and you should always believe that there's always a way out of it. There's always a way out. Just have to have that attitude. And so I started thinking about that, what I would do with that. It's nothing I can do about a midair collision except keep my eyes open. I mean, once it's happened, it's happened. If there's a fire, I'm going to get to the ground as fast as I can. But if I have loss of elevator, what would I do? Well, the elevator, which controls the nose of the airplane and therefore its speed and the flare and all of that, is operated by control rods. It's literally aluminum tubes that are connected to the stick, and I pull back on the stick and it does a couple little bends and moves the thing up and down. If I had lost that and that had broken, that'd probably be the end of you if you don't think about what the hell you're doing. Because if I lost the elevator on that airplane, I'd come home and tell you all about it. And the reason I tell you all about it is because the elevator has an electrically driven trim tab. It's two little buttons on the control stick. If I push the one button forward, it'll tend to nose it down. Push the back, it'll nose it up. So what's happening is, even though the elevator is essentially just loose and not doing anything, because I can't control it because I don't have the control rods anymore, I can still move this tiny little tab on the back of the thing, and that's going to make the elevator go up or down. Now, it's a lot less responsive than control rods, but if I lost the elevator, I would declare an emergency. I'd find the biggest runway I could find, which would almost certainly be Van Nuys, and I would go way out, and I would start a 3-degree approach. I'd just go out there, and I would fly the trim tab until I saw white over red on the visual glide slope indicator, and I would set the airspeed, and I would set the trim tab so that I am coming in at stall speed plus 10 knots, let's say plus 20, and that airplane was 60 knots. And I would just trim this thing, and I would just keep my hands off the throttle, and I would just trim it till it was on the glide slope and the airspeed was stable. And technically speaking, that thing could fly itself right onto the runway, and you burst a tire, but you'd be fine. What I would do is, just as I was getting to the very end on the glide slope, I would actually just chop the throttle and put a little bit of up trim on and just try to flare a little bit. But the reason I bring this up is because this is how you have to think. Now, I've heard a story, and I don't know if it's true. It sounds almost impossible, but I've heard it, about a guy who was doing aerobatics, and he over-G'd the airplane. He pulled it turn too hard, and he could feel something crack, and it was the wing spar, which is what holds the airplane in the air, the structural brace of the wings that actually lift the airplane into the sky are the spar, which is either steel or wood, and it runs down the length of the wing, and that's very strong. And so this guy apparently was doing things, and his wing spar, he felt it crack, and he could look out, and on one wing he could see the wing starting to buckle. And if he loses the wing, apparently he didn't have a parachute or something. I don't know. This is the story. So according to this story, the wing is about to collapse upward like this, and the guy has the presence of mind to roll the plane inverted. Now the pressure, the force on the wing is going actually in the other direction. It's compressing, so he's actually got, the wings are staying on. And the story is that this guy flew the plane inverted back to the runway, rolled it at the last second, put the wheels on the ground, and then the wing fell off. I don't know if it's true or not. I like to think it's true because it gives you the sense that, there's always a way out. Last thing I'll say about this is I got trained in gliders at a very, very, very fine flight instructor. He was telling me these stories about how you never give up. There's always a way out of this. And he was talking about apparently a true story with Chuck Yeager. I'm pretty sure it was in the F-104. So Yeager is going to try and set a altitude record in a F-104, which has a wing the size of my iPad. And he's up very, very high, and he sets this altitude record, and he's got control jets like on a shuttle or something. And he comes back in, and whatever the original situation of the flight was, Chuck Yeager is in an airplane, and he's in a flat spin. And he's just going round and round and round and round and round. Now, there's fake videos of planes with their wings coming off and flying upside down. Now, this is a true story. So Chuck Yeager's in this plane that's coming straight down, and it's just spinning, and he can't get out of it. And he's doing everything he can to recover the spin, and all of the things that he's learned how to do through training and through thousands of hours of flight time is not working. He cannot get the plane out of a spin, and I've heard the radio of this, and this is not the situation in the right stuff, because the incident in the right stuff. This also happened with Chuck Yeager. The plane goes into the ground, he ejects or something like that. But this is what actually happened to Chuck. So I guess it wasn't the F-104. In any event, Chuck Yeager is in an airplane. He's going down thousands and thousands of feet per minute. He's in a flat spin. What he wants to do is he wants to get the nose down, right? And instead of constantly pushing opposite rudder, which is keeping the plane in the spin, center the rudder, nose down, pick up some airspeed, center the elevators, center the ailerons, and let go of the rudder. And when you get a little bit of flying speed, then back on the elevators and stop trying to unturn yourself. Just dive out of it and come back up. He can't do it. So all he can do, apparently, is roll the plane inverted. And that's what he does. And he comes out of it. And this is what Chuck Yeager said about this event. This is what my flight instructor told me. He said, I could not get the plane out of a spin, but I could get it into an inverted spin, and I know how to get out of one of those. So he made the situation worse in order to make it better. Couldn't get this plane out of a spin, but I could get it inverted, and I know how to get out of an inverted spin. So that's Chuck. Not a nice guy, but he's an amazing pilot. All right, moving on. Okay, we got a couple from Eric Blake here. Let's see. We'll take with the one of the most ratings right now. Simple question. How the heck do we fight the trend of Californian lefties and others moving to red states and turning them blue? We complain about it all the time, but how do we fight it? Or is it hopeless? I don't know. Ruining California is something that I'm living with, and it's something that is tolerable only because it's self-inflicted. But when I see Texas becoming a battleground state because so many liberals who have ruined California have now moved to Texas or whatever, this is a genuine concern. You're not allowed to shoot them. I already checked on it. It's against the law, apparently. So all I can tell you is my hope is that California is so far ahead of the country in terms of heading off of this progressive cliff that I think the only thing that will stop happening, what you're saying is happening, is either the conservatives and the Republican Party figure out how to make a political message and sell freedom to people. I don't know why this is impossible, but they certainly don't seem to be able to. But I think the only real life solution is for California to utterly collapse economically. And not just economically either. Like the rule of law, the whole thing just needs to just go down. It just needs to just plain fail. And it's got to fail. It will fail here before it fails in Texas or Iowa or anywhere else. Of all the things that I despise about progressives, this is the number one thing. Our policies are so toxic, we now have to leave this beautiful state. We're going to go someplace else that's working, and now we're going to make sure it doesn't work either. It's a mental illness. It really is. It's a mental illness. Because you can't say this is Iowa and you're not allowed to move here. It'd be nice if you could. This is why I wish California would secede from the Union. I really do. I wish it would secede, and if it secedes, then all of the liberals around the country would move to California, which would be the progressive capital of the world. All the conservatives would move out. I may stick around because if you're a volcanologist, you got to live under the volcano. But in any event, California should just secede. And then you'd have two countries that you can compare. And I'd go the other way, too. I'd say either Texas secedes or Iowa, Idaho. I don't care. You take one state out of the Union, fill it with American conservatives, and I'm moving there. Now, just because California goes liberal doesn't mean I'm going to move out. But if there was an actual free conservative state, I would move there. And as much as I love Texas, Austin is damn near as bad as Berkeley. So, look, all of this progressivism is simply, it is a waste product of prosperity and security. And as long as we have prosperity and security, we're going to have more and more and more people who take them for granted. And as long as they take them for granted, they're going to get weaker. And then eventually some enormous catastrophe is going to happen. And then all of this inverted reasoning will look as insane as it actually is. I've said before, if you live in California, if you're a barista at a Starbucks and you feel like you can make your crops grow by meditating about indigo auras over the crops, and that by thinking about the indigo aura you're going to make your crops grow faster, you can do that. If you're a barista at Starbucks, you can believe in that method of farming. But if you're actually farming, especially if you're farming and you need the food for your own self, you don't have that luxury. You have to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning and working your ass off. So you can afford to be stupid here. And the nicer it is and the richer it is and the safer it is, the more stupid you can be. This is my personal hell, is watching things fall apart and knowing why they're falling apart. That's a great question. Here's Jim Burwell, and he's got a picture of a piece of artwork. Hey, wait, I don't have to do this anymore. I can just go, baby, go. All right, screw you. Now we can actually just talk about things and comment on them because we don't have to make it very pretty. Go away. Yeah, I see this stupid. Come up. Here we go. Yeah, what? Jim wants to know, what do we make of this? You'll notice it's from moveon.org. For those of you who may not be paying attention, this is the Muslim member of the House of Representatives who is so anti-Semitic and so everything. When they, the subject of 9/11 came up, and this Muslim member of the House of Representatives of the United States of America said, yeah, some people did some things. I'm glad she's there. I wish there were more of them. The only solution is to have people realize what these people actually believe. So Jim asks, what is it behind the left's support of Islam and anti-Semitic Muslims like Ilhan Omar? Why are they so anti-Israel, pro-Palestine, when time after time Palestine attacks Israel with rockets, etc.? Well, Jim, you're laboring under a misconception. And the misconception that you're laboring under is that the people who are doing what you're saying have an education and a brain, neither of which are in any evidence whatsoever. Let me elaborate. You say that why are they so anti-Israel, pro-Palestine, when time after time Palestine attacks Israel with rockets and so on? The answer is that modern leftists are so infantile that while they may have read this, they haven't seen it. You have no video of a rocket blowing an Israeli family up, and if you did, it would be suppressed. You may remember the massacre that happened on Easter Sunday in Sri Lanka, where a number of Easter worshippers were killed by unknown terrorists. No mention of the religion of the people doing the bombing, and no mention of the word Christian. They're Easter worshippers. And the reason is because, as Richard the Cat pointed out, it's all about guilt by association. So the object of the left is to do this: associate religion with perversion, patriotism with racism, and capitalism with cruelty. And so you could not have a headline that says Christians massacred by Muslim terrorists, because Christians have to be the bad guys, because everything they're doing is about destroying the center of the country, the moral and geographic, demographic center of the country has to be destroyed. Christianity has to be seen as nothing but as an incentive to murder homosexuals and drag them behind cars. It's the only thing that Christians... Oh, and they can also be pedophiles. That's the two things that Christians are allowed to be. Patriotism has to be about racism. It has to be about bombing brown people who own the land. And capitalism has to be about cruelty. Doesn't matter how much wealth it creates, as long as there's somebody who's poor and miserable, even if they're a drug addict or whatever the case may be. That's capitalism's fault. So, this is what happens. So they don't have a picture of it. What they do have a picture of, Jim, is they have a picture, and it's a 20-year-old picture now, if not older. They have a picture of a 8-year-old boy throwing a rock at a tank, and the tank's muzzle is pointed right at this little kid. And that's their image of Israel. They have pictures of Israelis who are video of Israelis going through crowds, arresting people who may have just murdered people by knife point and throwing them to the ground. And all they see are Israelis in body armor and helmets, and some poor, and when I say poor, I mean economically poor as well. That's very important. Poor, authentic third world person being thrown to the ground. So the number one motivation of all of this, Jim, is that progressivism is about victimhood. It's all about victimhood. It is entirely dependent on the conscience of decent people who they call oppressors. So the idea behind progressivism is that Americans are racists and murderers and cold-blooded killers, and therefore you owe us. When in point of fact, most Americans, virtually all Americans, are just opposite of that, but they don't want to be thought of that way, so they agree. So the reason that the left has become pro-Palestine is because the Palestinians are the underdogs. They're the victims. They look like victims. It doesn't matter, Jim, that they're causing all of this. It doesn't matter that they're sending innocent kids out there to get shot at. You would say these situations where, and you saw this with this convoy too, this immigrant convoy. And you're thinking, all right, so these Palestinians are going to confront Israeli soldiers at this tower, and they're going to start throwing Molotov cocktails and all the rest of it. And why is this woman out there with this baby in her arms in the front of all of this? And this is a hard thing to have to say, but it's true. The reason that woman is holding the baby so that the baby can be killed by the Israelis, the reason that there is a woman in there and a child in there in what is obviously a violent confrontation is in order for them to be killed. That's why they're there. They are there to provide the picture, and they know it. They are there to provide the picture that is going to generate the guilt to give them what they can't get through legitimate means. It's all about victimhood, all of it. This is why we hear about all of these hate crimes against Muslims, which aren't true. There just aren't any. Christians being beaten up all the time, intimidated on campuses and so on, and that's not reported. So when you get this soft, and I don't mean just emotionally soft, I mean intellectually soft, when you get this plain stupid and all you see is the outside of things, is the exterior, because you have no education and no willingness or ability to challenge anything, whoever is being oppressed is not only the victim, they are also morally correct, which means they're also factually correct. Got that? If I'm in a difference of opinion with somebody, and even if it becomes an argument or a violent argument, if I disagree with somebody, the person who is losing is weaker than the person who is winning. And because they're weaker, that means that they're morally superior. And because they're morally superior, that's the side you have to be on. It doesn't matter that the Palestinians as a movement are a bunch of self-immolating murderers who throw grenades into schoolrooms of 4-year-old girls, while Israeli doctors operate to save the lives of Palestinians who may have been next in line in the bomb blast. They do it by who's in the most danger. They don't heal all the Israelis first. If Israel wanted to push Palestine into the sea, it's easy for them to do. If they were the monsters that everybody says they are, that the Palestinians say they are, then we wouldn't be having this discussion. Excuse me. Because the Nazis were those kind of murderers, and so were the communists. And so they did. They would just wipe out the villages. Problem solved. And this is how all of it works, guys. All of it, all of it, all of it, all of it is work. This is the dynamic. You can't criticize this person because they're black and they can't help it that they're black, and because they're black, they're victims, and because they're black, they've been oppressed in this life as well as 7 generations ago. Therefore, because they're black, they have to be victims, and because they're victims, they have to be morally correct, and because they're morally superior, they have to be intellectually sound as well. And you can't criticize them intellectually, because if you do, you're taking advantage of their victimhood, and their victimhood is the result of the racism, and the racism is not something that anybody can do anything about. So you see, there you go. I'm going to make this the last thing I think I talk about tonight. I am going to, in the comment section, T-Dog says that to say black people are victims because they're black is racist. Most black people will tell you that black people cannot be racists. You see how it works? They can't be. When you accuse somebody like Al Sharpton or this creature of being racist, they will tell you it's impossible for them to be racist. I can't be a racist because I'm a victim. Well, how are you a victim? Well, I'm a victim because I'm Muslim. Doesn't matter what they've done. Doesn't matter what the people around them have done. It's all about skin color. They are, in fact, obviously nothing but racist. All of the left is racism. And all of the white liberals who are trying to help these poor, benighted people are trying to help them because they don't think they're good enough to help themselves. Pretty simple, really. Yes, Scott points out progressive blacks, not all blacks, needless to say. This country was so much healthier before this whole thing started. So here's what I want to close on, and I'm going to just say this as plainly as I can. I want to talk to these people. We're going to put her and Muslims aside for a minute. I want to talk about the reparations thing. And here's what I would want to say to Al Sharpton, who, as you may know, is leading this move for reparations for slavery. Now, we did pay reparations to the Japanese that were interned in World War II, but I think that's different because that was a payment made to the people who actually suffered the harm. Wasn't made to their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. It was paid to the people who suffered the harm because I think a big injustice was done. So forget the case, okay? This is the point. Let's just get this clear from the beginning. I'm not talking about whether or not there's a case for reparations. Just forget that. Just put it aside. Forget it. Here's where I'm going with this. I want to sit down with Al Sharpton and say, okay, what did you have in mind? Now just play with me on this. Just hear me out. I want to hear them say, what did you have in mind? Well, certainly we need to have be made right for all the economic disadvantages that we've suffered. Fine. So it's a check then, basically. Yeah. All right. Well, how much? I want them to say, have you noticed? Now stay with me for this. Have you noticed that you never hear what the reparations are, only that they deserve them, only that they're due them? Forget about whether they deserve it or not. It's not relevant to my point. My point is, if you were to sit down on national television as the President of the United States and just sit down and say to Al Sharpton and whoever else you want to loop into this in order to gain all of the credibility you can, say, what do you want? What is it you want? And I'll bet you anything they would not answer that question. Now listen, the reason they won't tell you what they want is because they don't want reparations. They want you to think that you owe them is what they want. They don't want reparations. They have never said what those reparations are. So I say, and I'm going to do a firewall on this. I guess I'll do it next week. I say, let's pay it. I'm as serious as I can be. I say, let's pay it. Let's do the math. Let's pick a number. I think we could probably agree $100,000. I bet you most people in the country who they've determined deserve reparations would take $100,000. I think that's 7 generations down. Let's say it's $100,000. And forget the whole thing because, I mean, how are you going to determine, no, if you're a person of color, you get the reparations. I don't care. If you're a black person, I don't care. The fact that Barack Obama would have to pay reparations to himself because he's half white, I don't care about any of that. What's the number? They won't give you a number. That tells you something. But let's just say the number was $100,000 times 11 million black Americans. Did I do that math wrong? Let's try it again. $100,000 times 1,000. It's $100 million, right? No. Can somebody just please do the math for me? I don't know what the hell the matter with me is, honestly. I used to know how to do this. Can somebody just multiply 100,000 times 11 million for me, please? And just give me the answer. This is the kind of thing I should have been able to do as a 4-year-old, and I probably was able to before I got a smartphone to make me stupid. What is 100,000 times 11 million? We're just looking for a number, right? We're not making a legal case here. I'll wait while the adults in the room with functioning brains will immediately kick this answer up, and I'll get 9,000 copies. 1.1 trillion. Thank you. Okay. That's a lot of money. That's $1,000 billion. 1.1 trillion. Okay. So let's just call it a trillion. $1,000 billion. Well, we're 25 trillion in debt. Our annual federal budget is 3.5 to 4 trillion, but our GDP is much higher than that. So let's say it's $1 trillion. We've already paid well over $1 trillion we pay $1 trillion probably every 2-3 years in terms of entitlements, right? So just stay with me on this. We pay entitlements to the tune of 250,000 for Medicare and 250 billion for Medicare, 250 billion Social Security, all of it. We're just dealing with ballpark, okay? Just ballpark. We're dealing with a figure. You know what? I don't care what the total is. Forget the total. I don't care. It's not relevant to me. I say we have it and we can pay it. So let's say that it's 5 trillion. And that's it. I'm not going to argue about it anymore. Let's just say. And that this money will be divided up equally among the people of color in America who have decided that they're entitled to this. So let's say it's $5 trillion. Well, every year we pay $500 billion in entitlements. So we're really talking about 10 years worth of entitlements. So let's say we pay it. Now what happens? Let's say that they get their agreement on entitlements, and I'm going to be doing the paying, but let's just say, all right, we agree. $100,000 to every person who claims to be descendant from slaves. Those will be the reparations that your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents suffered. Right? Fair enough? Here's a check, $100,000, take it or leave it. Yes, they'll take it. Most people would take it. Needless to say, there are millions of black people of sterling character who would simply scoff at the whole idea. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the left. So here's $100,000. Thanks. You got to sign here first. What am I signing? You're signing a document, legal document, that says that in payment of $100,000, you have been made whole, and we're even. What now? That's what a reparation is. A reparation is a payment to make things okay, to make things right. So here's $100,000 for something that your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents suffered. And people like me are going to pay it, even though my family didn't get here until 1915. It's 50 years after slavery. But okay, this is what you want. This is what we'll pay you, $100,000. It's $100,000, and no tax on it either. So here it is, and all you have to do, it's not strong-arming, it's a simple agreement. It's just a simple, constant contract agreement. Nothing to it. It's like any other contract. It's like any other legal settlement. It's like any other legal settlement. I fell down in your restaurant. Okay, what do we owe you? Well, because of injury, yes, fine. Now I can't even spell the word restaurant anymore without breaking. Yes, fine. And even when I see the letter R, I start to have heart palpitations. Yeah, fine. What's the number? $100,000. Okay, you sign this document. The restaurant gives you a check for $100,000, and it's over. It's done. It's closed. So now you have a check for $100,000 in one hand and a piece of paper that says that in exchange for this $100,000, I renounce any further claim to injury on the part of white America. You want reparations? Here they are. almost everybody would take it, of the people who are low enough to, to want to take it. But this is why this is such a strong argument. Grant it. It's like I say, always grant them. Anytime you have an argument that seems ridiculous, grant it. Just assume. Okay. So, those of you that are carrying this grievance, here's a check for $100,000. Sign on the dotted line. You and your children and everybody else have been made whole by this payment, and that's the end of it. We're square. First of all, that would be the best money we could spend in this country, because if this thing doesn't get behind us, and I'll tell you something else, that scheme of mine for $5 trillion would be the kindest thing that we could do to Black Americans. It'd be the kindest thing that we could do. Not just because we're giving $100,000 to people, because that's trivial. What we're giving them is we are giving them the gift of no longer having the club of victimhood. Okay, here you go. Here's $100,000. Start a business, go to college, whatever you want. Here you go. But we're even now. Whatever that number is. I don't think Al Sharpton would ever accept any amount of money, $10 million per person. He wouldn't take it because he understands. Al Sharpton's a multimillionaire. He doesn't need the money. He's got all the money he needs. What he needs is the weapon. And I'm saying, let's just buy the weapon. If this is the weapon that's carving America in half, if this is the weapon that's destroying the peace and the comedy of this country and the decency, if this is the knife that is cutting us in half, I say let's buy it. Let's not fight for it. Let's just buy it. What's it going to cost for us to take this knife out of your hands? How much money? What you talking about? And whatever that price is, we agree to it. We pay it. Because if we paid it, the guilt would be over. Needless to say, if I feel like I have to work in order to pay $100,000 to people who were not slaves or descended from slaves while my parents were not slaveholders, that's going to generate some real resentment on my part. Now we both have some resentment. Now we both have a case. Now we both have anger. But what we really got is, once you take that money, if you ever open your mouth about it again, you could say with a perfectly clear conscience, hey man, you got your goddamn money. It's over. We're square. That would be, it'd be the best money we could spend in this country. Just pay it. I'm not saying they deserve it. On the contrary, my entire point is that they don't deserve it. That's why we should pay it. I would still, now needless to say, that plan is not going to happen, but what I think is in the realm of actual possibility is I would like to sit down and have an opportunity to corner Al Sharpton and to say specifically, what do you want? We want reparations. I understand that, and I understand what a reparation is. So what I'm asking you is, what do you want by way of reparations? What kind of reparation do you want? What is the amount? What do you want? Tell me what you want. Tell me what this fight is all about. In fact, better way to put this, tell me what will make this right. Tell me what will make all of this even. Give me a number. Tell me. He will never tell me because he can't. The reason he can't tell me is not that he doesn't know. The reason he can't tell me is because he's terrified that I'll pay it. And if I pay it, it's over. If we pay it, it's over. This whole thing that's been going on for 250 years now in this country, this whole thing it's over. It's done. It's done. Here's a gift. Here's a gift of $5 trillion. And the gift is not the $5 trillion, which is just going to go back into the economy anyway. The gift is, here's a gift to free you from thinking that other people are keeping you down and that your failures are the result of other people's actions. Now you realize this is the gift that we're going to pay it, and then and now you're free. We paid a lot of white blood and money and treasure to free black people in the Civil War, and if that wasn't enough to atone for it, it was good enough for the people who were actually freed. But since their great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are unhappy about this, here's your number, here's your check. Now we're even. That is really, really brilliant. It just is. Granted. By the way, we would add $5 trillion to a $25 trillion deficit, which was what, 15, 14, 11 trillion when Barack Obama came into office. See how this mind of mine works? Here you go. Here's money. Here's $100,000. Tack it onto the bill. Just put it on our tab. And you write the checks and they cash the checks. And all of this $5 trillion goes into the economy. I'm not saying it would stimulate the economy. I suspect if you put that much cash out there, it would simply drive inflation. But, okay, who gets hurt most by inflation? Poor people. So, it's just a way to think about things. It's a way to clarify things. I was talking to somebody today, somebody who's got a really good system to reduce domestic violence. We're going to have lunch with him next week. And he said, geez, Bill, I can't tell you how much it means to me. Your work is so important. I'm not buttering my own bread here. I said to him, listen, this is not theory. I'm not some genius who invented all this stuff. I don't come up with any of this. None of this stuff is mine. None of this is my idea. Nothing. All I do is take complex things and make them simple. And anybody can do it, I think. And the reason it's easy to make complex things simple is to just assume that this complex thing, wind it up and put it out in the world and see what happens. Instead of trying to fight it theoretically, this is a bad idea because we don't know how do we decide if somebody's went? No. It just goes on forever. No, grant it. Don't argue with people about why there can't be a Loch Ness Monster. Grant that there is a Loch Ness Monster. And then ask, why aren't there more pictures? Don't argue about the smudges and the ripples and the waves and all the rest of it. Say, okay, you've convinced me. There's an air-breathing pterosaur that lives in this lake. It's the last surviving specimen of an extinct race of dinosaurs, just like you said, and it lives in caves and so on. But it is an air breather, right? Sorry, I said pterosaur. Plesiosaur is what I meant to say. It's a plesiosaur, right? It does have to stick its head up for air, right? Yep. Okay. Well, then why don't we just sit around the lake for an hour? Why don't we hold hands? In fact, why don't we get enough people out here who believe in the Loch Ness Monster to hold hands all the way around Loch Ness so that we got it all covered, and then we'll sit there, and in the space of an hour, this thing's going to come up for air. If it's just loafing 10 times, maybe. Don't argue about the pictures. And don't even say, where are the pictures? Just say, okay, let's say you're right. And as I've said, I've used this analogy before. I love it. I say, you see, the reason that this proves that there's no Loch Ness Monster is because I can assert that there are enormous creatures that live underneath the surface of the water. Enormous creatures. And they're air breathers. And I can make this assertion. And I call these things whales. And the reason that I can be confident that whales exist and Loch Ness monsters don't is because there's 1,000 pictures of whales taken every single day. I don't need a ripple on the horizon. I don't need a black smudge in a grainy photograph taken in 1934 to prove the existence of whales. If I want to believe in whales and convince you that there are such things as whales, we can get on a boat right now and go out and see a whale. Forget videos and all that other stuff can be fake, just like the moon landing. Come on, let's go. You don't believe in this whale? Let's go. Come with me. We'll get on a boat, and then you will see the whale, and you'll get to touch it. Just grant it. It's amazing. It's just amazing. It's like this is what I do with the immigration argument. It's been a while now, but Jessica Alba stands there and has a sign that says, "No borders, nobody's illegal, no locked doors, open doors, everybody's welcome." Okay. All right. Granted. Where do you live? No, not Bel Air. I mean, what's your street address? Because you don't believe in borders or walls or property or any of that stuff. Okay. You've convinced me. Where do you live? So that we can start posting signs for the illegal aliens to come over and stay at your house. In fact, not even them. I'm just going to come over. And what do they say after that? Nothing. They got nothing. They have nothing to say after that. Because there is nothing to say. These are the kind of arguments that we should be making all the time, and that's why I haven't given up on this country. Because if you ask a liberal who believes in open immigration, where they live so that they can take people in, they will not tell you because they don't believe it. If you ask a millennial who believes in socialism to sell his phone in order to distribute the wealth to people who are in greater need, they will not do it because they don't really believe it. If you have a progressive who talks about high taxes and how good high taxes are and how we should raise taxes to help the poor, and you look at that person's tax returns, you will not find that they have overpaid their taxes or even paid what is really a thumbnail estimate of their taxes. You'll find they've taken every single legal deduction they possibly can, and in some cases illegal deductions, because they don't believe what they say they believe. And the only way to change their minds and the minds of the people in the middle are to just grant them the assumption. Grant it. Okay. Another way of granting the assumption is to say to the on the reparations issue is, well, hang on now. This happened 7 generations ago. Why are you owed money? Well, because we're still suffering from the event. Okay, all right, okay, I understand that. Okay, so let's just assume you're right. So the suffering continues downstream basically forever or until reparations are made, right? Yes. Okay, got it. I understand completely. So I think that the white people of America need to write you a check for $100,000 to make up for the horrible slavery that occurred to you. And then I think you need to write a $100,000 check to American Jews who were kept in slavery by African civilization of Egypt. I think you need to write them a check for $100,000, maybe more, because they suffered longer. They were in there. They were slaves for 400 years, not 100 and 250. Technically, they've got a better argument than you. So we'll write you the check to make up for your reparations for slavery, and then you can start finding Jews on the streets of America, and you can write them checks for reparations too. And what are they going to say to that? Well, that was a long time ago. Yes, it was. It surely was. But you're going to have to pay it, pal. You're going to have to pay. You're going to have to pay American Jews money for what your people did to their people. And then it's all over. And then it's all over. It's all over. And we cannot do this to save our lives or the country. Anyway, hey, we need members at billwhittle.com. This is a capitalist society. I have not applied to the federal government for a grant in order to bring you these messages. I don't receive money from the Ford Foundation or the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I just got a product that I'm selling here, and I think it's valuable. So come on, join the family. What's the point of hanging outside the window with your face pressed against the glass, wishing you could be in there with all those fun people who are laughing and having a great time on Thanksgiving? Just come on in. Everybody's welcome here. Okay, that'll do it, I think. I was going to try and finish the frickin' firewall tonight. I will not. I'll do it first thing in the morning. I have to be here at 8 a.m. in the morning because Scott frickin' Ott, who's just one of the most abrasive and nasty people you ever want to meet, is just, if I'm not here in the chair by 8 o'clock, I start getting, the phone starts ringing, and then the screaming starts, and then the cursing, and the personal insults, and then the insults of my wife, and then all of that stuff. It's unbearable. It's just unbearable. I can see that this has backfired on me because Matt Harris says, so Scott makes you work, huh? Excellent. Ding. Doink. We're out of here. See you guys next week.